The linen tablecloth was pristine white. I had ironed it myself that morning, pressing out every single crease until it was smoother than a polished stone. 70 years. This wasn't just a birthday, it was a milestone, a gentle pivot point, and I wanted everything perfect. I wanted to feel seen. The dining room, usually bathed in the soft glow of sunset, was heavy with a forced, early evening warmth. I lit the tall, tapered candles, 24, maybe more, to compensate for the cloudy October sky. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg from the cake, baked by my daughter-in-law Susan, was sharp in the air, almost too artificial. It didn't smell like the comfort of home, it smelled like an obligation. I sat alone at the head of the table, turning my simple silver wedding band around my finger. I had been waiting for 20 minutes. My son, Mark, had confirmed 5 times that they would be here by 5 o'clock sharp. Sharp. The word now felt like a cruel joke. The garage door finally groaned open, followed by the familiar chaotic rush of my 3 grandchildren and Susan's sharp, managerial voice. Mark followed, his expensive leather briefcase still clutched in his hand, a phone glued to his ear. He didn't make eye contact. Not a flicker. "Hold on, Dad," he murmured into the receiver, waving a dismissive hand at me as if I were a waiter he'd already tipped. "No, I'm at the house, but this won't take long. Just a quick stop." A quick stop. On the day I turned 70, a day I had spent preparing, hoping, remembering, I was a quick stop between his corporate meetings. The air left my lungs in a slow, silent sigh. The grandchildren, bless their busy hearts, tossed their backpacks onto the oak floor, a sound like dull thunder, and rushed to the table for the cake. Susan managed a tight, bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. She placed the store-bought flowers, a lovely, if generic, bouquet of white lilies, in a vase, careful not to smudge the pristine linen. "Happy birthday, Mom." "Sorry we're late," Susan said, her voice high and hurried. "Mark had a critical call. You know how it is, the new venture." I nodded, unable to speak, the muscles in my jaw aching from the effort of holding my smile. The new venture. That phrase had been the invisible wall between us for 5 years. We managed the ritual, the awkward, rushed singing of happy birthday, the click of phone cameras, the swift carving of the overly sweet cake. I watched Mark. He took his slice, then immediately retreated to the far corner of the living room, whispering intensely into his phone. It was during the quiet scraping of forks against china that I heard it. The house was an old colonial, and the heating vent system carried sound with chilling clarity. Susan and my oldest granddaughter, 12-year-old Lily, were in the kitchen, stacking plates. Lily, in her sweet, clear voice, asked, "Grandma is going to live with us soon, right? Dad said you need the space." Susan's voice dropped, metallic and cold, but the vent carried every word right to my ear, settling like ice in my chest. "No, sweetheart, we hope she sells this house to us eventually. It's perfect for the renovation. We don't need her, Lily, we need her equity. Honestly, the way she lives, I wish she'd move into an assisted living place already. We could use the money and the space. She just takes up resources. We don't need her anymore." The words weren't a slap, they were a clean, surgical cut. They weren't meant for me, and that made them worse. They were just a statement of fact, a casual business plan. I was not a mother, not a person, not the centerpiece of a celebration, I was a resource to be allocated. I didn't move. I kept my gaze fixed on the wilting lilies in the vase. The colors of the room, the candlelight, the white linen, the rich mahogany, began to blur into a soft, terrible gray. I realized my hands, clasped in my lap, were trembling uncontrollably. My son, Mark, finally ended his call. He strode back into the dining room, his face bright with corporate success. He leaned down, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, the scent of his aftershave was harsh, and said, "Got to run, Mom. Huge pitch tomorrow. Happy birthday. We'll talk soon." He didn't wait for my reply. As the heavy silence settled once more after they left, I felt an emptiness so profound it was physical. I was 70, sitting in the beautiful, quiet house I had poured my life into, and I was irrelevant. They didn't see the woman who helped him with his college tuition, who drove 500 miles when he had the flu, who worried over his new venture. They saw a barrier, an obstacle to their financial comfort. The shock was turning into a quiet, cold resolve. I looked down at my trembling hands and whispered into the sudden quiet, "I am still here." If you've ever felt overlooked by the people you love the most, or if you've had a moment where you realized your worth was being measured by what you own rather than who you are, please share your story in the comments below. Reading your heartfelt experiences helps us all feel less alone. If this story is already resonating with you, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Lydia's True Stories. It lets me know I should keep sharing these true, meaningful moments. The morning after my birthday, the silence in the house was no longer heavy with sadness, but sharp with a new clarity. I woke up before the sun, the memory of Susan's words still ringing, "We don't need her anymore. She just takes up resources." I didn't cry. There was no point. Tears felt like a surrender, and I was done surrendering. Instead, I stood in the kitchen, the space where I'd made thousands of comforting meals, and methodically cleaned the spilled coffee grounds from the counter. Small, deliberate actions. That was where I would start. My first act of reclamation was physical. I retrieved the worn, leather-bound financial ledger from the hidden compartment in the old roll-top desk. Mark, my son, had always managed everything for me, the investments, the property taxes, the monthly budgets. It was his way of being helpful, and my way of avoiding complexity. Now, holding the ledger felt like holding a map to a life I hadn't truly navigated for years. Fear, cold and liquid, pulled in my stomach. What if I was too late? What if he had already tied my hands? I called Mr. Henderson at the bank. I used my most steady, businesslike voice, the one I hadn't needed since I stopped volunteering at the library 30 years ago. I requested a full review of my accounts, my retirement funds, and my property deed. "Eliza, I can send this to Mark, or his firm," Mr. Henderson suggested gently. "No, Mr. Henderson," I replied, the word firm and unexpected, even to my own ears. "Send it only to me. To this house. Thank you." Hanging up, I felt a tremor run through me, not of fear, but of adrenaline. The first invisible barrier had fallen. The next day, I dressed in a suit jacket that hadn't seen the light of day in a decade. I drove my old Buick to the main branch. The bank lobby was intimidating, all marble, glass, and hushed conversations, but I walked straight to Mr. Henderson's office. We spent 3 hours together. I learned I was still the sole owner of my house, the beautiful colonial with the chipped windowsill I loved. I learned I had enough savings, managed conservatively, to live comfortably for another 20 years, even without the equity Mark and Susan coveted. My financial health wasn't dependent on their approval, it was built on my late husband's foresight and my own decades of careful living. I am not a resource to be allocated. I am solvent. I am independent. I signed the paperwork to revoke Mark's secondary access to my accounts. It felt like signing a declaration of independence. I didn't look back. The fear was slowly dissolving, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning confidence. My most significant act came a week later. The old lock on the front door was the original, easily picked. Mark, Susan, and the children all had keys. I called a local locksmith, a shy young man named Daniel with grease stains on his overalls. Standing silently while he worked, the rhythmic whir of the drill and the heavy clink of the new deadbolt being installed was the sound of a boundary being drawn. "There you go, ma'am," Daniel said, handing me 2 new, shiny brass keys. "Top of the line. Nobody's getting in without one of these." I took the keys. They were heavy and cool in my palm. They weren't just keys to a house, they were keys to my sanctuary. I stood in the doorway for a long moment after Daniel left, feeling the air move freely around me. The house had belonged to my family. Now, it belonged entirely to me. With my boundaries secure, I turned inward. The small, forgotten courtyard behind the kitchen had become a chaotic tangle of weeds, a physical manifestation of my own neglect. I changed into old clothes, pulled on gardening gloves, and went to work. The first day, the work was frustrating. My back ached, and my knees protested. But soon, the repetitive action, pulling out the stubborn roots, loosening the compacted soil, the smell of damp earth and crushed mint, became meditative. The soil was rich. It just needed tending. One afternoon, covered in dirt, a low-slung voice called out, "Well, look at you, Eliza. Did you finally decide to wrestle that kudzu?" It was Martha, my old college roommate and neighbor from 2 blocks over. She was pruning her rose bushes, her face framed by a wide, sensible sun hat. Martha and I hadn't spent much time together lately. Mark had always subtly discouraged me from engaging too much with local distractions. "Martha," I laughed, the sound rusty and unfamiliar. "It's fighting back." Martha climbed the low wall separating our properties and sat down on an overturned bucket. We didn't talk about Mark or Susan or birthdays. We talked about life, about the new variety of hydrangeas she was trying, about the political absurdity in the town council, about the book I used to recommend to everyone. "You know, Eliza," Martha said, leaning forward, her gaze steady and warm. "You always had the sharpest mind for people. You were the one who remembered everyone's birthday, everyone's favorite tea. You were always the glue. You were always the glue. Not the resource. Not the barrier. The glue." The simple affirmation, freely given, felt more valuable than the contents of my entire bank account. It wasn't about what I provided financially, it was about the intrinsic quality of who I was. I continued working, my focus now on creating a new space. I purchased a small bird feeder and hung it where I could watch from the kitchen window. I wrote letters, not spiteful ones, but clear, administrative letters to my attorney, formally establishing a living trust. The beneficiaries were not Mark, but my 3 grandchildren, with clear stipulations that the funds were for their education and charitable causes, to be managed by a neutral third party until they reached 30. Mark would inherit his mother's beloved painting and the family photo albums, and nothing more. It was justice, not revenge. It was ensuring my love truly served those who needed it, rather than fueling the greed of those who didn't need me. As autumn deepened, I sat in the newly cleared courtyard, sipping warm chamomile tea, the quiet of the house a comfort, not a curse. The house felt lighter, less encumbered by the expectations of others. I had reclaimed my name, my finances, and my inner garden. My transformation was complete. I was prepared for whatever came next. If you've ever found strength in making a difficult, quiet decision to stand up for yourself, I encourage you to hit the like button for this video. Your small acts of independence inspire others. What's one quiet, empowering thing you've done to reclaim your own space? Share your thoughts below, and if you know someone who needs to hear this message of inner strength, please don't hesitate to share this story. 3 months passed. 3 months of tending the courtyard, 3 months of silent strength, and 3 months of checking my bank balance daily, not out of fear, but out of habit, a new ritual of self-reliance. The house was quieter now, but it was a warm, deliberate quiet. It smelled of real cinnamon, the kind I used in my own baking, and the faint, clean scent of the beeswax polish I used on the mahogany. The knock came on a cold, gray afternoon. It wasn't the boisterous rush of the family, it was a hesitant, almost apologetic rap. It was Mark. He stood on the threshold, not in his tailored suit, but in a windbreaker and jeans. His shoulders were slumped, and the sharp corporate energy that usually crackled around him was gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. He looked, truly looked, at me for the first time in years. "Mom," he said, his voice flat. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. I didn't rush forward, I simply allowed him entry. He walked into the living room and stopped, looking around. He noticed the new lock immediately, touching the polished brass with a look of surprise, then moved on to the windows, which now overlooked my meticulously planned winter garden. He sank onto the sofa, placing his hands on his knees. They were shaking slightly. "The new venture," he began, his throat catching. It collapsed. "Hard. We lost everything. Susan, she's filed for divorce. She took the kids and she took the last of the savings." He paused, looking directly at me, his eyes bruised with failure. "I need help, Mom. I need the money for a down payment on a small apartment. I know you have it. You always do." This was the moment I had prepared for. The conflict that I used to dread now felt manageable, almost easy. I didn't offer a hug or a tearful word of comfort. I offered truth. "Mark," I said, sitting opposite him in my comfortable armchair. "I'm sorry you're hurting. I truly am. But the money you're talking about is now tied up in a living trust. It is earmarked for your children's education and for charity. It is not available for a down payment." His face drained of color. "You, what? When did you do that? Why?" "I did it shortly after my birthday," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "I did it to protect my assets and my peace. When you walked in 3 months ago, Mark, you didn't see me. You saw a resource. I chose to redistribute that resource where it could do the most good, and where it couldn't be taken away." Mark leaned back, his defeat turning into a terrible comprehension. "I knew it. Susan said you were being difficult. She said if I'd just got you to sign the power of attorney papers, none of this would have happened. Susan was seeing dollar signs," I stated simply. "And she taught me something important that night." Mark looked at the floor, silent, defeated. The tension in the room was thick, but it was his tension, not mine. Finally, he looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "On your birthday, Mom. I wasn't just on a work call. The deal was already falling apart. I was talking to the lawyers, trying to keep it from Susan, trying to save my family. I was so consumed, so terrified of being a failure, that I just couldn't see anything else. I saw you, and I thought, she's safe. I can ignore her for now. I never intended to hurt you. I just had no room left for anything but my own panic." His words, simple and human, were the true twist. He wasn't malicious, he was just drowning in his own life, and in his self-absorption, he had discounted mine. I stood up, crossed the room, and placed my hand on his shoulder. This was not a moment for financial rescue, but for maternal comfort. "Mark, I forgive you for your distraction. I forgive you for making me feel invisible. But forgiveness doesn't mean I dismantle the walls I built to keep myself safe. I cannot give you money, but I can give you soup, and a quiet hour, and the knowledge that your mother will always love the man, not the resource." We sat in silence for a while. He ate the soup I heated up, a simple lentil soup, with the slow, focused hunger of a man who hasn't truly nourished himself in months. The final piece of healing arrived later that week in the form of a FaceTime call. It was Lily, my 12-year-old granddaughter. "Grandma," she whispered into the phone, her voice earnest. "Mom says Dad is moving into an apartment. Things are weird. Can I ask you something? Can you teach me how to make your real apple pie? The one with the crust that's soft, not crunchy? Not the one Mom buys." My heart swelled. Lily wasn't calling for money, or access to the house. She was calling for connection, for tradition, for me. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, a genuine, joyful smile finally reaching my eyes. "We'll start with the dough. It needs quiet, careful hands." I hung up, walking over to the kitchen window. The sun had broken through the gray, casting a long, bright rectangle of light onto the old wooden floor. I was standing in the middle of it. The house, once full of a silence that screamed of abandonment, was now quiet with the profound peace of ownership. My son ignored me on my birthday. But then, I saw what he really did. He gave me the gift of final clarity, the knowledge that the only person who can truly abandon me is myself. I learned that the greatest love we can give our children is teaching them that we are whole without them. The journey through life's disappointments is not about getting revenge. It's about building a quiet, beautiful home within yourself that no one, not even your own child, can ever take away. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video, leave a comment about your own journey of self-discovery, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, real-life stories, emotional stories, and inspirational stories about dignity and healing, subscribe to Lydia's True Stories and turn on the bell. I post new, meaningful stories every day.